All right, so I got to tell you about the time I stayed at this Airbnb in a small town upstate. I've been traveling a lot for work, and honestly, I was just looking forward to a quiet weekend alone. The pictures of the place looked nice enough, a quaint old house with a rustic charm. It was a bit isolated, but that was fine by me. I needed some peace and quiet. I get there late in the evening, and the host wasn't around, but they left the key in a lockbox by the door. No big deal. The house itself was exactly like the photos, maybe even better in person. It had this old-world vibe with creaky wooden floors and antique furniture. The kind of place that made you feel like you'd step back in time. After settling in, I decided to explore a bit. There was a living room with a fireplace, a small kitchen, and a couple of bedrooms upstairs. I chose the one with a big four-poster bed. Everything seemed pretty normal, but I couldn't shake this weird feeling. You know, that nagging sensation that something's just off. But I brushed it off as just being in a new place alone. The first night was uneventful, just me binge-watching some Netflix and falling asleep early. But the next day, things got weird. I was walking around the house, checking out the old knickknacks, when I noticed something odd about one of the walls in the hallway. It just didn't match up with the layout of the house. I noticed there was a space that didn't seem to belong to any of the rooms. Curiosity got the better of me, so I started knocking on the walls, trying to figure out what was going on. Then I hit a hollow spot. My heart skipped a beat. There was definitely something behind that wall. I searched for any signs of a hidden door, and sure enough, I found a small seam along the edge of the wood paneling. It was almost invisible, but with a little more prying, I managed to pop it open. Behind the wall was a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. I should have stopped there. I mean, what good ever comes from going down a creepy hidden staircase? But I guess curiosity got the best of me. So I grabbed my phone for light and started descending the stairs. They creaked under my weight, and the air grew colder the further I went. When I reached the bottom, I found myself in a small, windowless room. There was barely any furniture, just a single chair in the middle of the room and a table with some old photographs scattered across it. I picked up one of the photos, and that's when I felt a chill run down my spine. The photo showed a group of people standing in front of the very house I was staying in. But what caught my eye was the fact that none of them looked right. Their faces were slightly blurred, and their eyes were dark, almost hollow. It was like looking at something out of a nightmare. As I flipped through the photos, I noticed they were all of different people, but they had one thing in common. Each of them had that same eerie, unnatural look. My gut was screaming at me to get out of there. But before I could move, I heard a noise from upstairs. It was faint, but unmistakable. The sound of footsteps. I froze, trying to listen. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, like someone was pacing back and forth. But I was alone, right? The next thing I knew, the footsteps stopped, and there was a loud bang, like a door slamming shut. I bolted up the stairs and into the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest. I checked every room, but there was no one there. I didn't sleep at all that night. I just sat on the edge of the bed, listening, waiting for something to happen. Eventually, the sun came up, and I packed my stuff and got the hell out of there. I later found out that the house had a dark history. Apparently, it was once owned by a family that mysteriously vanished without a trace. Some say they were involved in some kind of cult, while others believe they were victims of something far more sinister. All I know is I'm never staying in an old, creepy house again. So, this happened last year when I decided to take a solo trip down to the coast. I found this cute little cottage on Airbnb, right by the beach, perfect for a weekend getaway. The host was super nice, messaged me a few times to make sure everything was ready for my stay. The place looked great in the pictures, and the price was a steal, so I booked it without thinking twice. When I got there, the cottage was just as charming as I'd hoped. It was small, but cozy, with a deck overlooking the ocean. I could already picture myself having morning coffee out there, just soaking in the view. The first day was amazing. I spent most of it exploring the nearby town and lounging on the beach. When evening came, I decided to cook myself a nice dinner and enjoy it on the deck. As I was eating, I noticed something strange. There were a lot of windows in the house, like way more than you'd expect in a place this size. And they weren't just in normal spots either. There were small, square windows high up on the walls, almost like they were meant for looking out from a different angle. It was a little weird, but I didn't think too much of it at the time. I figured it was just part of the quirky design of the house. That night, I settled in for bed, but I couldn't shake this weird feeling like I was being watched. I told myself it was just because I was alone in an unfamiliar place, but the feeling wouldn't go away. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like someone was standing just outside my room, looking in. At some point, I must have drifted off, but I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night. The room was pitch black, and I had this overwhelming sense of dread, like something was seriously wrong. Then I noticed the faintest sound like a soft tapping. It was coming from the window near the ceiling. I lay there completely still, trying to figure out what the hell it could be. The tapping continued, rhythmic, almost like someone was knocking, but not quite. I wanted to get up and check it out, but my body wouldn't move. I was frozen with fear. Eventually, the tapping stopped, and the room went silent. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind, or maybe a tree branch brushing against the window. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that. The next morning, I was exhausted but determined to figure out what had happened. I climbed up on a chair to get a better look at the window where I'd heard the tapping. That's when I saw its scratches. Long, deep scratches running across the glass like someone or something had been trying to get in. I got out of that cottage so fast, I didn't even pack my things properly. I just threw everything into my bag and left. I didn't care about getting a refund or explaining to the host. I just needed to get away from there. Later, I found out that the area was known for strange occurrences, especially in the off-season when the town was nearly deserted. People had reported seeing figures standing outside their homes at night, only to disappear when approached. I don't know what was trying to get into that cottage, but I'm just glad I left before it succeeded. Alright, this one still freaks me out to this day. I was on a road trip across the country, and after a long day of driving, I decided to stop in this small town I'd never heard of. I found a listing on Airbnb for a room in someone's house. The host had great reviews, and the price was right, so I booked it on the spot. I arrived pretty late, and the host, let's call her Nancy, was waiting for me. She was an older woman, probably in her 60s, with this sweet, grandmotherly vibe. She welcomed me with a warm smile and showed me to my room. The house was old, but well kept, with that typical small-town charm. Nancy gave me a quick tour, told me a bit about the town, and then said goodnight. I was dead tired, so I crashed almost immediately. I woke up in the middle of the night, though feeling a bit disoriented. You know that feeling when you wake up in a strange place and forget where you are for a second? Yeah, it was like that. But then I heard something. It was faint, but I could have sworn I heard whispering. I sat up and listened, but the house was silent. Figuring it was just my imagination, I lay back down and eventually fell asleep. The next morning, I got up early and headed to the kitchen, expecting to see Nancy. But the house was empty, no sign of her anywhere. I figured she'd just gone out, so I made myself some breakfast and waited around for a bit. But after a couple of hours, I started to get a little worried. I hadn't seen a car in the driveway, and the house was completely silent. I tried calling her name, but there was no response. I even knocked on her bedroom door, but there was nothing. It was like she'd just vanished. I decided to leave a note and head out to explore the town, hoping she'd be back by the time I returned. The town was small, barely more than a few streets with a diner, a gas station, and a couple of shops. I grabbed some coffee and asked the woman behind the counter if she knew Nancy, describing her in the house. She gave me a puzzled look and said she didn't know anyone by that name who lived in town. I thought maybe Nancy was new or just kept to herself, so I didn't push it. But as I walked around, I started asking a few more locals, and every single one of them had the same reaction. They didn't know her, had never heard of her, and some even suggested I must be mistaken about where I was staying. Feeling a bit uneasy, I headed back to the house. When I got there, the door was still unlocked, just as I'd left it, but something felt different. The air inside was heavy, like the atmosphere had changed. I called out for Nancy again, but the house remained silent. I decided to check her room. I know it was intrusive, but I was starting to feel like something was seriously wrong. I knocked on the door first, just in case, but when there was no answer, I slowly pushed it open. The room was exactly as she had shown me the night before. Perfectly neat, bed made, everything in place. Except there was no sign that anyone had actually been living in it. No personal items, no clothes in the closet, nothing. I started to feel this deep, unsettling fear creeping up on me. It was like the house was playing tricks on me, making me doubt what I had seen and heard. I went back to my room, packed my stuff as quickly as I could, and left. I didn't even bother locking the door behind me. I got in my car and drove out of town as fast as I could. It wasn't until I was a good few miles away that I started to calm down. I pulled over at a rest stop to catch my breath and try to make sense of what had happened. I pulled out my phone to cancel the booking and leave a review, but when I checked the Airbnb app, the listing was gone. Not just unavailable, it had completely vanished from the site like it had never existed in the first place. I tried looking up the address on Google Maps, but nothing came up. It was as if the house and Nancy had been wiped off the face of the earth. I still don't know what really happened during that stay. I've gone over it 100 times in my head, trying to figure out if I missed something or if there's some logical explanation. But the more I think about it, the less sense it makes. All I know is I'll never stay in a stranger's house again. No matter how many good reviews they have, or how charming the place looks, there's no way I'm taking that risk. Because sometimes, what seems like a harmless, cozy Airbnb might just be something far more sinister.